From next season onwards, F1 drivers will be at risk of sanctions if they, and I quote, display political, religious and personal statements or comments, notably in violation of the general principle of neutrality promoted by the FIA. I think this is motivated by the social issues that both Seb and Lewis in particular have been promoting and pushing in Formula One over the last few years. And of course, this has gone down like an absolute lead balloon online, with two main kind of trails of thought. One being that the drivers should be allowed to express themselves freely however they choose, and the other being, politics and all that shouldn't be allowed in sport. Well, I wanted to put this video together to give my thoughts, my opinions on this latest statement. Is it as bad as it maybe sounds on the surface, or had the FIA scored yet another massive own goal? Let's talk about it. So again, to clarify, this isn't a blanket ban necessarily. This is essentially, you can promote what you like, but we've got to sign it off. And again, it's not just covering political statements, but also religious and personal. Now, obviously with personal, like, would you have to get approval from, Jean Todt to wish your mum a happy birthday? Maybe. But as for religious and political, I would say that they're pretty much the same thing, really. Anything religious that's being spoken about would be deemed by some to be political. Now, my initial response to this is, who are the FIA to decide whether a statement is admissible to them? Whether it's neutral enough to grant their approval? Is it based on the morality of the subject, or is it based on the potential controversy that will come from it? Because this all feels like an attempt from the FIA to minimise potential controversy in the moment and into the future, which doesn't necessarily play out that way. I mean, the FIA and F1 themselves are prepared to promote messaging that isn't directly related to racing, with We Racers 1, for example. This acknowledges that they are more than aware of the power that their platform has to promote, encourage, raise awareness of social issues. So is that political, or is that personal human rights versus political messaging? It's all very muddy. You asked 100 different people, you get 100 different responses. There's no hard line between the two, because any subject can be deemed as political by someone. But answer me this, who do I think actually cares more about promoting diversity and inclusion and sustainability and community, which are the pillars that We Racers 1 stands by? Who do I think cares more about that? Lewis and Seb, who've personally put their necks out on the line and got a bit of slack for it for promoting causes that are important to them, or the FIA? Look, ultimately it depends on where you put your skepticism. Some people look at the drivers and Lewis and Seb in particular and talking about the things they talk about as, oh, they're just trying to score social points. And others look at the FIA and We Race as One through the exact same perspective. Now, I'm sure there's individuals at Formula One, at the FIA, who care about sustainability, the environment, inclusivity, all that, right? Merely the fact that it covers such a broad, wide scope, there's no focus there. It doesn't strike me anywhere nearly as genuine as, for example, Alex Albon helping build a sports hall in Thailand, or Checo donating millions to underprivileged kids in Mexico. I do hope that Formula One through We Racers 1 are bringing like initiatives on the back end that we're not necessarily seeing, that are making a real difference, but publicly facing, getting all the drivers to give their little message, it doesn't feel very genuine to me, I'll be honest. And in my opinion, I think if the FIA are unwilling to give drivers free rein and right to express themselves in what they believe in, I think they can't seriously expect us to acknowledge and respect their indulgence in socially conscious messaging. Now, I get it, the FIA and F1 are not government, they are privately run, held institutions, so legally they are entitled to essentially do what they want. But you could also say the same about Twitter at the moment with Elon. He's on a mad one, seems at the minute. He's kind of contradicted himself every other day, throwing a lot at the wall, seeing what sticks. But also, Twitter has grown to such an extent that it doesn't feel like a company, it feels like a public extension of online discourse, which is from a human point of view, than a business making money, which of course it does also need to do. The FIA are the overseers of motorsport over the vast majority of motorsport, top tier motorsport categories, with F1 being the shining light of all motorsport. So should the FIA be held to different standards because of this ultimate totalitarian kind of rule that they have over racing? And this is the thing, right? F1 drivers' humanity is what helps make the sport so compelling and why the sport is so big now. If we were all purely here for wheel-to-wheel racing and nothing else, they would have just made the cars automated robots, basically. It's the human storytelling, the danger, the thrill, the emotion that makes Formula One what it is. And the FIA are more than happy to celebrate, promote the individuality of drivers when it comes to, I don't know, Drive to Survive, when it comes to their own socials and making cutesy ooh-woo videos of the drivers playing with each other. Like, they're more than happy to do that then. Drive to Survive, expanded social media, bigger calendars, even better racing. None of that works if you don't have the human side of the drivers underpinning all of it, especially if you want to grow a broader audience of non-motorsport, typically affiliated people. And in the article, F1 uses the word neutrality as if there's this ultimate sitting on the fence position that they can establish. They want to be Switzerland. But for me, that just doesn't wash at all, and you only have to look at the F1 calendar to see that in broad daylight. Nations want to host Formula One races because they are abundantly aware of the political gain that they stand to make from hosting a race. You get more legitimacy on a global market, and you give confidence to potential consumers like you and me who are watching by association to this country. If you've just watched the Bahrain Grand Prix, are you more inclined to go on a holiday to Bahrain compared to if, like me, you've never really had any other exposure to that country whatsoever? Yes, I would be more inclined to. That's just like Saudi Arabia and Qatar simply would not be on the calendar if that was not the case. The intensity of fan support and the depth of sporting infrastructure, as much as it is there to an extent, it is nowhere near big enough to justify a purely fan-led desire to race in those nations. And look, I'm not here to debate the morality of that and whether that's right or wrong. I'm purely here to say that it is political. That decision making is political. F1 endorses that kind of decision making being made to create the F1 calendar. It's like the FIA and F1 want to play their own little game of social justice and political money making in the shadows, but then when it comes to Lewis Hamilton bringing awareness to Breonna Taylor's murder or Sebastian Vettel talking about tar sands in Canada, they shit themselves. You're welcome to idealise the thought of Formula One being purely sport with zero political sway in it whatsoever, but as far as I'm concerned, that's a naive way of looking at it because it's just not possible. It never has been and it never will be. The only difference now is that drivers are starting to find their voice, especially the more mature drivers like Lewis and Seb in the paddock. And look, we as fans don't get a choice. Ultimately, we're invested in the sport. We're here because we love the sport, the racing, the drivers, the teams, the history. And when the FIA and F1 choose to take the money from these nations that want to increase the political standing of their country and host a race, we also have to accept it. But then when the drivers want to use the platform that they've freely earned and risked their lives for weeks on weeks upon years to promote a message that means something to them, that's too much to allow. And then obviously you've got the teams themselves, right? With all the messaging that Seb and Lewis have put out into the world. Aston Martin and Mercedes have overly, as far as I'm concerned anyway, been very supportive of that. But will that always be the case going forward? What if a driver wanted to express some less socially acceptable opinions? The driver's wearing their overalls at the end of the day, so would they potentially get involved? I mean, it starts to get murky. You see where I'm going? I mean, in some instances, you could argue this actually pushes the FIA into a less neutral position. If they just allow drivers to freely speak their mind on any issue, then they could just be like, look, we're actually just kind of sitting here on the fence and just letting them crack on. But then say a driver wanted to talk about birth control, for example, a very divisive topic that always will be. And say a driver wanted to promote the idea of birth control, but then the FIA would almost certainly come in and stop them doing it because it's so controversial. But then does that make the FIA look like they're anti-birth control? And vice versa, if they allow it, does that make them look pro-birth control? You know what I mean? Like, it puts them into a position. And then you go through all that, and would the driver even listen? I mean, Sebastian Vettel was more than happy to take a reprimand at Hungary during the national anthems when he was wearing his Same Love t-shirt. And further to that, it's very easy to get behind someone, again, like Seb, who's promoting, bee colonies to save the environment. I can't imagine many people have anything negative to say about that. But then what if a driver chose to turn up to a race next year with a pro-Russia, anti-Ukraine t-shirt? Would the vast majority of people be in support of the FIA doing something to intervene with that message? To ban it, to reprimand the driver, whatever? I think most people would. And this is why policing speech and human choice of expression is such a murky subject when you get into the details. And it's not something I expected to be talking about when it comes to F1. But you know what? Here we are. Honestly, I think my overall take is that the FIA should be more hands-off. They should allow the drivers to speak their mind. I think rather than having to go through approval on everything, you allow the drivers to express themselves however they want to. And if there's any really egregious examples, which are super extreme, then fair enough, intervene. But having everything go through this kind of approval process, I think that's a bit much. But also, no one's mind was ever changed by banning their ability and their freedom to express it. So difficult, isn't it? But anyway, that's what I've got to say on it. Let me know your thoughts and feelings down below. This is obviously a bit of a divisive one, so keep it nice. We can have healthy debate. I will delete comments that are nasty, all right? I'll be in there, cleaning out the rubbish if I need to. Like and subscribe to support what I do. My name's Tommo. Thanks again. Have a good one. Ta-da.